Welcome to the special Christmas edition of Media Buzz. I'm Howard Kurtz. Merry Christmas to all of you and Happy Hanukkah, which is also underway. Thanks for sharing your holiday with us. Ed will scrutinize the coverage of the Clintons' new blame game. Did Hillary really lose because of Vladimir Putin or angry white men? President Obama's latest shot at Fox and Facebook's controversial new plan to crack down on fake news. But we begin with the aftermath of a story that was badly hyped by the media, whether the Electoral College would somehow, in a last-gasp revolt, deny Donald Trump the presidency.
Members of the Electoral College will meet across the country today. That to validate the results of the presidential election. Now, typically, it's a ceremonial event. This time around, though, it comes with an unusual amount of attention and even controversy.
538 members of the Electoral College will vote today in their state capitals. It's a formality required by the Constitution, but there will be protests this year, and some electors are urging others not to vote for Donald Trump.
Cokie, it seems that people are still holding out hope that the Electoral College, when they vote tomorrow, will somehow miraculously decide that Hillary Clinton is the winner.
Then came the actual voting, and it was a nothing burger.
What we've known for weeks was made official this evening as members of the Electoral College cast their ballots in all 50 states and the District of Columbia.
It's official. Electors across this country putting Donald Trump over the 270 electoral votes he needs to become the president in January. It did not come without some fiery moments today.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage of the Trump transition, Aaron McPike, political commentator and a former reporter for Real Clear Politics. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. And Michael Tomasky, columnist for the Daily Beast. So when the Electoral College, Aaron, formally certified Trump's victory, he tweeted this: "We did it. Thank you to all of my great supporters. We just officially won the election. Parentheses, despite all the distorted and inaccurate media." So can we now conclude that media bashing will become a permanent feature of the Trump presidency?
Oh, I'm sure there will. It has worked for him so far. But in defense of coverage of this story, at least some of it, it has been a shocking year with all kinds of surprises. So we had to cover it some.
Some, but maybe too much. I want to come back to the coverage, but I want to turn on this tweet now. Trump advisors believe, and I think he believes, that he is battling back still in this post-election period against coverage that is consistently negative.
Well, the media have far worse approval ratings than even Donald Trump does. We always talk about Donald Trump's bad approval ratings. Media have far worse. And this is a great example of why. I mean, they hyped that Hillary was going to win the election and ended up losing more electors than Donald Trump did. It reminds me of that character on The Simpsons, Sideshow Bob, who's always stepping on rakes. That's what the media seem like. Whichever direction they turn, they just keep stepping on rakes.
Reduced to a cartoon character. But like the debate here with Trump continuing to bash the press and journalists by name and news organizations by name is, should he be more gracious and unifying, or is it better for him to be riling up his base and keeping them active to support his agenda?
Well, yes to both. I mean, yes, he should be more gracious and unifying, but yes, it's better for him politically to rile up his base. That's what he's going to do.
You don't see them as mutually exclusive?
Well, in a normal world they would be, but I guess they're not very mutually exclusive now. I mean, he knows that the people who voted for him and the hardcore Trump supporters, whenever he sends out a tweet that says the media did this and it was outrageous, they're going to believe him no matter what the actual objective truth of the matter is. So that's a way to keep people on his side and keep people worked up.
Right, but with a grand total of 2 electors going rogue against Trump and 4 against Hillary, as Molly alluded to. Yes, of course it had to be covered because it was sort of interesting. Can we now admit that this was blown out of proportion by the media, perhaps some wishing that maybe this would actually happen?
Well, it wasn't covered appropriately. As you may remember, Politico had a pretty lengthy story on how a number of these electors were lobbied. They got phone calls, they were badgered, they were harassed, they got emails, there were some death threats. But as far as I'm concerned, only Politico did that story, and then everyone else talked about it. That's an important story that should have been done more broadly, and that's what a lot of the coverage should have been based on.
Yeah, but we're talking here not just about news coverage. I mean, you had columnists, who have been around a long time and won awards like Kathleen Parker and E.J. Dionne in the Washington Post, actually encouraging this, saying the electors should go rogue, which, if this had been a serious thing, which it was not, would have essentially overturned the results of the election.
Right, and it fits into that pattern of the media trying to affect a particular change rather than just report on a given issue, and it's not healthy.
But the end game, was, of course, to talk further about the Electoral College and whether we still need the Electoral College. And that coverage is going to die going forward. But that we should actually talk about that again before the next election.
Some media are entitled to try and encourage an outcome. They're called columnists, they're called polemicists, they're allowed to have their point of view, and they're allowed to say. E.J. Dionne is perfectly allowed to say what he wants to say about the Electoral College. Number one. Number two, to pick up on Aaron's point, to the extent that we had, and I think to some extent we did have, a serious conversation about what the Electoral College is, why it came into existence in the first place, and why it should still exist, that was a useful conversation.
That is a good debate, but we would be talking about whether the Electoral College should be abolished in favor of the popular vote in the future, as opposed to sort of changing the rules in the middle of the game.
Right, which is why the lack of forward-going conversation shows that this was all about just trying a last-ditch attempt to unseat Donald Trump.
Well, there was some news the other day because there's been a lot of focus not just on Donald Trump's own potential business conflicts, having this worldwide empire of real estate, golf courses and so forth, but those of his kids, who obviously will play some, at least informal role in his administration. So Eric Trump announcing that he's no longer going to solicit money for his charity. And this came after a kind of a drumbeat of news stories about all three of the adult kids having essentially opened the door to potential conflicts in the view of these stories. For example, Eric Trump's foundation was going to auction off Coffee with Ivanka Trump. And there was an invitation drafted, without his knowledge, says Eric Trump and Don Jr., to award a hunting trip with one of the two sons if you gave $500,000 or $1 million. So Eric Trump telling the New York Times, as unfortunate as it is, I understand the quagmire. You do a good thing that backfires. Were these stories that raise these questions actually raising legitimate questions that cause maybe a positive outcome?
Well, I don't know if it's a positive outcome if you pull back on charity, but it's just a fact of life that the Trump family and all of the people associated with them do have tremendous conflicts of interest, and this is something that the media really should pay attention to, paying attention to it in a good faith effort, understanding that it's a complicated issue for everybody to deal with. It's not just the family, it's going to be all the properties, all the business ties. There are so many ways that different corporations and foreign governments and other people can work with Trump family or their business ties to affect their interests. The media really do need to be on top of this, but again, being on top of it in a calm, rational, sober way.
I mean positive outcome in the sense that I think the family hadn't totally grappled with what winning the presidency would mean, and kind of facing reality that any effort to raise money, even for fighting cancer, which is one of the main things Eric Trump's foundation does, could be viewed as opening the door to influence peddling.
Yeah, and I think the press did play a positive role here, and I think we're in an unprecedented situation with all these family ties and all these business ties that Molly just discussed, and it's going to be an ongoing story. There's no way that this is going away, and part of it was exacerbated, I believe, by Trump canceling that press conference on December 15th that he had scheduled, where he said he was going to address these questions, and the questions remain unaddressed.
Right. I mean, some of the same questions came up about the Clinton Foundation, so you've got to ask the questions. At the same time, you know, it can't be over the top or prosecutorial. Let's just ask the questions and see what the family decides to do. All right, so here's a big scandal, really big scandal. Donald Trump spent 30 minutes talking to a group of reporters at Mar-a-Lago off the record, and they posed for a photo, and everyone was smiling, just like when you get your picture taken with the president at Christmas if you go to the White House Christmas party. And a lot of people were horrified.
Well, you do want to have off-the-record meetings with sources and the president if you can, whenever you can. The issue that I had with this in particular, and it's not a big deal, have an off-the-record meeting, you don't need to show a photo of it.
What's the big deal?
Because then you know exactly who was having that off-the-record meeting.
Well, the existence of the meeting wasn't secret. The contents of the conversation was.
Sure, but you know exactly which reporters then have access off the record to Donald Trump and which reporters don't.
Well, it happened to be the group of reporters and commentators, whatever, who were there at Mar-a-Lago. And here's the thing. Look, would it be better if all interactions were on the record and that you could share it with the world? I understand the debate, but if you have a chance to get some insight into the thinking of the president-elect or a sitting president and the ground rules off the record, I don't think it's some great betrayal. And I don't think taking a photo is that big a deal. But the reactions online were like, embarrassing. You should be ashamed.
Right. I'm not a big fan of off-the-record discussions. I think they really serve to benefit the politicians, and they do far less for the public interest. But that time to hold Donald Trump accountable for his presidency is really much more when he becomes president. This is exactly the time when you want to have an off-the-record conversation. You need a thaw in relations between the media and the press. It's just been so much. There's a perception in the people that there's been an unnecessary hostility toward Trump. If they can smooth some things over so that they can do a better job covering him, I'm all for it.
Every president does this, including Barack Obama, and they always do it on the day of the State of the Union. The network anchors get called in. And, yes, Donald Trump should hold a press conference. I wish he had not gone so long, but I just don't understand the shock. It's almost as if, I think because it's Trump, some people are saying, well, you shouldn't even fraternize with him.
I don't think anybody who's really in the know was really shocked by this.
Right.
I mean, I've been part of these off-the-record conversations. I think everybody has. The only part I object to is the smarmy picture. They shouldn't have posed for the smarmy.
All right, I'm outvoted on this, and I have not been part of them because I didn't make the A-list like Tomasky. All right, Kellyanne Conway was named White House counselor this week. She had a lot of hesitation about joining the administration. We talked about it on our show last week with her because she's got 4 kids, age 7 to 12, and could she balance it? So this question came up as she went on a whole bunch of morning shows when the new appointment was announced. Here's what Kellyanne had to say.
We were talking with Juan Williams earlier, and he was questioning, well, Kellyanne has 4 kids. How's she going to do it? He got creamed on Twitter.
Well, I would just say to everyone, not Juan, because I don't want him to be creamed, but I would say that I don't play golf, and I don't have a mistress. So I have a lot of time that a lot of these other men don't.
Wow. Now, this is why she's a really good communicator who's going to be, I think, the public face of the Trump White House. All agreed? Good joke? Bad joke?
Well,
Good joke.
I think it is interesting, though, that women tend to get asked questions about how they're going to balance their work and life. And I'm all for those questions. I think it's very important, and I wish more people would think about this. I actually just wish that men would also get asked those questions, because it's important for men to have.
Right. Men could have 12 kids, and the question doesn't come up. Fair enough. All right. Let us know what you think. Email us, MediaBuzz@foxnews.com. Questions and comments about the media. Ahead, is the press buying into the Clinton blame game on why Hillary actually lost the election? But up next, Facebook has finally designed a plan to combat fake news, working with the mainstream media, and some critics aren't giving it a like. Facebook is finally trying to stem its tide of fake news, and not everyone is happy about that. It's teaming up with fact-checking operations, including Snopes, ABC News, PolitiFact, and FactCheck.org, to confirm stories that are out-and-out fake. Now, in this experiment, such stories will be easier for readers to flag, and if the outside news groups deem them bogus, they'll be labeled false and buried in users' news feeds. Mark Zuckerberg company saying it's focusing on the worst of the worst, on the clear hoaxes spread by spammers for their own gain. Molly Hemingway, you write the following. Fake news hysteria is just that, hysteria. It's a narrative being pushed by progressives to explain how Hillary Clinton could possibly have lost an election to Donald Trump. Now, I have to partially disagree. I mean, there is absolute made-up BS on both sides, and it does have real consequences, as we saw with the D.C. pizzeria that was invaded by an armed gunman who believed an online story about a child sex ring headed by Hillary.
Yeah, but there's nothing new about fake news. Fake news has been with us since the world began, whether it's the Weekly World News or what you can get on Facebook. And this is just a desperate attempt to not deal with the reality that the media didn't do a very good job covering the news this year. And there are different ways you can handle fake news. You can hunt down literally every corner of the internet trying to find any possible evidence of fake news, or you can just do a better job doing your own job. And that's what I wish the media would focus on, rather than searching for enemies, real or imagined.
Michael Tomasky, a narrative being pushed by progressives?
Oh, no. I mean, look, we have to be able to agree on a few things in this world. There's not that much that left and right agree on in this country, but we have to be able to agree, I would hope, that if somebody is sitting at home and intentionally put some story out that they know to be false, like that Pizzagate thing, that we have to collectively do something, make some effort to try and stop that from happening.
Okay, so for instance, Rolling Stone putting out a story they knew was false on a gang rape at University of Virginia.
Well, they didn't know
that.
they didn't know it was
That
false.
was a horrifying journalistic
There were
felony.
There were journalistic failures every step of the way there.
Yeah.
And instead of condemning Rolling Stone, we have media figures praising it. You have President Obama saying it's a great example of a publication.
But I'm trying
That's a much bigger problem for people's
Who
trust
praised
in the
that?
media.
Who praised that Charlottesville story? Nobody praised that.
Initially, everybody praised the story until it was revealed to be
Initially,
a
and then when
total,
it was revealed,
total
it was
hoax. Again, through
trashed.
journalistic failure. And that's what we should be focused on. Our failures, our inability to report facts instead of pushing
Aaron,
narratives
let me just throw this
rather
at
than
you.
other things.
I'm trying to make a distinction here between all kinds of failures by the mainstream media, bad information, distorted stories, bias, you name it, and the people who sit in their basements and deliberately make stuff up, like the Pope endorsed Donald Trump,
Yeah, look.
In order to make some money.
Fake news may have been around since the beginning of time, but the internet has not been.
Right.
And Facebook is a huge source of news for billions of people on the planet. I mean, this is a really important story, and Facebook has been talking about how they're in the news distribution business, they are in the news content gathering business. I mean, you walk around this city and you will see advertisements to go live on any bus that you pass, on any bus stop. It's a problem, and Facebook really needs to take responsibility, and they're shirking it because in the statement they say, we believe in giving people a voice and that we cannot become arbiters of truth ourselves, so we're approaching this problem carefully. It was weak. I mean, they need to do a lot more.
So you believe that Facebook should hire editors and do it on its own?
They're talking about how they're a content and distribution
But
business.
then Facebook will be accused of bias and censorship anytime it makes a disputed call.
Tough. That comes with responsibility when you're giving news to that many people.
You see, for example, PolitiFact as partisan and unreliable. We don't have time to debate that here, but it's the same true for the Washington Post Fact Checker, factcheck.org. I mean, none of these organizations is perfect, but don't they at least try to use facts to debunk things that are not true?
No, the entire fact-checking enterprise has serious credibility problems. PolitiFact is a great example, not just because they are so partisan, as we've seen through what they've covered, but they don't even just necessarily cover facts. Facebook says they're just going to be looking for the worst of the worst, but PolitiFact has such mission creep. They don't just check facts. In fact, they hardly do that. They check opinions, predictions, analysis, and that's subjective. And people who don't know the difference between objective truth and subjective analysis should not be in the business of determining what is or is not.
By the way, some of this people call it censorship. Nobody is talking about deleting these posts, essentially tagging them to let people know. Although in a Pew poll, 84% of Americans say they're confident they can detect fake news. So maybe this is something that journalists are more concerned about than the average person.
Yeah, I don't think 84% of people really can detect fake news. No, what Aaron said is right. Facebook is a news delivery system now. And if you're going to be that comes with some responsibilities that they have to own up to.
Right.
And what about when fake news starts to blend with ISIS recruitment? I mean, this is a really serious problem, and Facebook should be taking it very
But censorship is also a serious problem. And I think it's interesting, Chinese state media thought that Facebook's plan was a great plan. That should concern us. That instinct is exactly the opposite.
So you see
of
the
what we should be
censorship,
seeking.
just in a few seconds, even if it just means that a story is kind of demoted in the news feed because there's some kind of consensus that it's fake.
I just think it's missing the entire problem, which is we need to do a better job with our coverage rather than looking elsewhere for problems. And the more that we try and control things, the more people are going to distrust us and seek other outlets. It's going to make the problem worse.
We need to do a better job with our coverage. Let's all agree on that. As a New Year's resolution, Aaron McPike, Molly Hemingway, Michael Tomasky, great to see you. And had the Newsweek reporter who had a meltdown on Twitter and a health scare after tangling with Tucker Carlson. But first, what on earth are Samantha Bee and Glenn Beck doing cozying up to each other? And can political partisans really get along? In the holiday spirit, we bring you a story of reconciliation, or at least a brief bit of shtick for a ratings pop. Samantha Bee, liberal feminist, former Daily Show star, who hosts Full Frontal on TBS, invited Glenn Beck, conservative crusader, one-time Fox host, who now runs The Blaze, to sit down and find common ground.
My audience is going to think that I am crazy for sitting down with you.
My audience hates your guts.
My audience hates your guts more.
My audience would like to stab you relentlessly in the eye.
Okay. My audience wants to kill me for normalizing a lunatic like yourself.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
So far, this is going great.
Great indeed. Now, it turns out the key attraction for these strange bedfellows is that both of them don't like Donald Trump. So that kind of ruins the Christmassy narrative, at least when Sam tells Glenn they should join in a broad coalition of nonpartisan decency. But then came this fascinating confession from Beck.
I believe you actually don't want to do damage. I, as a guy who has done damage, I don't want to do any more damage. I know what I did. I helped divide. I'm willing to take that.
And yes, they wound up reaching out and holding hands a little too long. Now, maybe they'll go back to saying politically inflammatory things for fun and profit, but there's a serious point here in a business increasingly built on polarization. Maybe folks in the opinion business could score their points with a little less demonizing and a little more respect for those who disagree. That would be one heck of a New Year's resolution. For social media, it's been a season of polarization after Donald Trump's victory. As The Hill noted, a new study found that 24% of Democratic voters blocked, unfriended, or stopped following someone on sites like Facebook and Twitter. Only 9% of Republican and independent voters did the same, according to the poll by the Public Religion Research Institute. 28% of liberals said they distanced themselves on social media because of the content posted by their former friends, compared to 8% of conservatives. So some hard feelings still out there on the left. Vanity Fair editor Graydon Carter is ramping up his rhetorical war on Trump and trying to capitalize on their long-running feud. Trump has shown he doesn't only beat up on the big newspapers and networks one day after Vanity Fair called his Trump Tower Grill possibly the worst restaurant ever. The president-elect tweeted, "Has anyone looked at really poor numbers of Vanity Fair magazine? Way down, big trouble, dead. Graydon Carter, no talent, will be out." The backstory here is that Carter's been after Trump since he helped run Spy magazine, which mocked the billionaire back in the 80s. And Carter blasted Trump just before the election and doubted he would win. I don't think he's leaving Vanity Fair anytime soon. And Vanity Fair is now touting itself as the magazine Donald Trump doesn't want you to read. That sounds like a bit of spectator sport, but in a new piece, Carter calls him, quote, "a preening and vindictive strongman at the top, living in gilded opulence and surrounded by generals and business cronies. Is this what a junta looks like? We may look back on November 8th and January 20th as days that will live in infamy." Now, hold on. That's taken from FDR's famous line after the aerial attack by Japan on December 7th, 1941. Graydon Carter is comparing the election of a president to Pearl Harbor? Looks like another journalist is suffering from Trump trauma. Ahead on Media Buzz, a look back at my interviews with Donald Trump and how his anti-media message evolved during the campaign. But first, there hasn't been that much media scrutiny of why the Democrats lost the election, or what's emerging as Hillary's blame game. It's been largely overshadowed by the Trump transition, but Hillary Clinton, her husband, and her inner circle are engaged in a blame game about her defeat, and that has started to generate some headlines.
But we're also learning more every day about the unprecedented Russian plot to swing this election. And this is something every American should be worried about. No kidding. You know, we have to recognize that, as the latest reports made clear, Vladimir Putin himself directed the covert cyber attacks against our electoral system, against our democracy, apparently because he has a personal beef against me.
And do you believe this was a free and fair election?
Well, look, I think the Russians clearly intervened in the election, and I think that now we know that both the CIA, the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI all agree that the Russians intervened to help Trump, but the media didn't cover itself with glory on the way they handled, I think, the matter. The New York Times reported this week in their own reporting said that they became an instrument for Russian intelligence.
I watched her battle through that bogus email deal, be vindicated at the end when Secretary Powell came out, and she prevailed against it all. But then at the end we had the Russians and the FBI deal, but she couldn't prevail against that.
The former president also told the Bedford, New York Record Review that Donald Trump doesn't know much, but he knows how to get angry white men to vote for him.
Those angry white men that Bill Clinton is talking about are the same, quote, angry white men that got him elected president, and were the same angry white men that Bill Clinton was complaining about for months that the Clintons weren't reaching.
But are the media avoiding an in-depth examination of why the Democrats really lost and whether they'll keep losing? Joining us now, Susan Faricio, chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics. So, Susan, 6 weeks after the election, Bill Clinton's talking about the bogus email deal, angry white men, and his grousing is becoming pretty big news.
Well, what's being drowned out, really, is what you said, a close introspection of why Democrats weren't able to win an election that everybody thought they were going to win very easily. But you can't ignore what influence the Russian hacking or the late FBI letter from Director Comey to the Congress had on the election, because it was a close election. The outcome, she won the popular vote by several million votes. These are all good arguments, but I do think what's being drowned out is how Democrats weren't able to reach out to the voters in those key swing Rust Belt.
Right.
That's the conversation we're not hearing much about.
Not much, and that's not as sexy, of course. And look, I understand when the FBI affidavit was made public this past week, the rationale that James Comey used to look into the Anthony Weiner laptop and the emails, right before the election, and he made it public, and it got so much coverage. I understand Clinton people being upset about that. It was kind of flimsy, but all this drumbeat about it's Comey's fault, it's Putin's fault, it's Huma Abedin's fault, it's the media's fault. Do you think the media are buying into this blame game?
No, I mean, I think it's always a story of how the losers and the losers team interprets the defeat, right? And they all coming at it from different viewpoints. Hillary's trying to kind of hide. She'll be embarrassed if the donors never give another dollar to the party, so she's trying to give them something to hang on to. John Podesta, campaign chairman, getting very aggressive, saying there's something broken at the FBI. They're all sort of having their different responses, but it is true what you're both referring to, which is that they don't want to look inward at how many Democratic voters just wouldn't get in the car and support her. And Bill Clinton's wrong. The email deal was not bogus. The email deal really killed off her candidacy because it showed her lying repeatedly long before the FBI letter from Comey. She was under an FBI investigation. People felt she wasn't honest. They weren't motivated to support her.
Any of these things could be said, as you say, Susan, to tip a close election. But, the essential thing here is that it's hard to tell what Hillary's core message was and why she didn't connect with working class voters. But people also forget how tense relations were between Hillary Clinton and the press. A lot of people think the press was kind of an attack for her. But the media usually love party and disarray stories. And there's been some good, smart analysis, absolutely. But I'm not seeing as much of it, especially with the Democrats now controlling nothing, Capitol Hill here, or the White House. Is it just we're all talking about Trump?
Well, I would correct you on that. I think the media loves Republicans in disarray stories. I don't think they're as attracted to Democrats in disarray. I do believe that the onslaught of attacks against Trump in the mainstream media, what you read reporters tweeting out on social media, it just shows me that the deck is stacked against Trump. A lot of reporters didn't care for him as a candidate just because of his style and his approach. And I think that's what you're seeing now in the reporting. And that's why, let's look what happened after 2012. There was so much attention and focus on the autopsy report from the Republicans and the fact that they were a splinter group. How would they get back together and move forward? You're not seeing any of that right now. Maybe we'll see that later, but not now, though.
And so much attention and focus on the GOP civil war over Trump during the primaries and during the general election. But do you agree that is it not the question of just that Trump's making so much news that he's soaking up all the oxygen, that there is more media interest in when Republicans are falling or having some kind of civil war? And if so, is that
ideological? I don't think at this moment, I actually disagree about this moment. I think what we're looking at is Trump transition makes an incredible amount of news. Some of it useless, but it's just constantly pouring
every hour.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you look at, like you said, Howie, they're not in control of anything more. So we focus on whether or not the House Democrats would reelect Nancy Pelosi. A big mistake, they did it anyway. We are focused on the fact that Keith Ellison is the leading contender for a fight to run the Democratic National Committee. Today, you're looking at still the remnants of what Harry Reid has done to First Senate Democrats in the Senate. I think there's a lot of focus on how kind of lost they are and how much in denial they're in.
But it's overshadowed in your view.
But there's a much more newsy thing. We haven't had a new president in 8 years. This is bigger news.
That is also true, and we probably never had a new president like Donald Trump who makes news just by tweeting. So Politico had an investigative report the other day that I found fascinating. The top aides to Hillary Clinton, we're talking here Jennifer Palmieri, Jake Sullivan, and others, were in pretty regular touch by email, by phone, by text, with the top organizer for this. Let's get the electors to go rogue, vote against Donald Trump, and take the presidency away from him, even though he won 60 million votes. The Clinton folks never quite committed to it, but they certainly were aware of it. The media missed that story.
Well, first, I'd just like to point out more leaked emails. This time we can't blame the Russians. This is clearly coming probably from one of the electors, leaking this to Politico.
Probably, yeah.
What could Clinton's camp really do? Think about that last debate when Chris Wallace asked whether Trump would accept the outcome of the election, and he said, well, we'll see. And Clinton's response was, well, that's horrifying. And she said, that's not how democracy works.
Right.
How on earth could they now publicly get involved? So they kind of did it on the side.
So you're saying the media, the Clinton remnants of the Clinton campaign had an incentive to hide this from the press, knowing they would be vilified for even giving tacit support to this, like, let's overturn the Electoral College. What's your take?
Well, they knew it was going to fail. But remember, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, they have to move on. I don't know what fantasies they have about their daughter running for public office one day. But all of these Democrats are scrambling for jobs. And they're going to stay in this party. They're not going to leave the Democratic Party. Right. There's nothing left of it. So they're actually under different pressure from different interest groups and activists to remain engaged and say, yes, this is an outrage.
But in terms of the media coverage, do you think this is a big story? That they did the same thing with the recount, kind of hands off, but certainly not opposing it. But now, secretly, we're in touch with these people, and I was kind of dismissing the whole thing as a show, a side show that wasn't going to go anywhere, as indeed it did not. If I had known the Clinton campaign was in regular touch with these people, I would have treated it as a much bigger deal.
It is a much bigger story, the fact that they were encouraging it, but to the media, they were downplaying it.
Yeah.
Especially given how they played the story up at the end of October to their advantage to make Trump, I think they felt this was the nail in the coffin for Trump.
Oh, remember how crazy the media went after that third debate when he would not vow to commit in advance to obeying the results? And then, I don't want to overstate it, but it's pretty fascinating stuff, particularly based on that political story. Susan Frischio, AB started. Great to see you. And after the break from Las Vegas to Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump and I went one-on-one half dozen times during the campaign. But look at how his message evolved during his march to the White House. I interviewed Donald Trump more than a half dozen times during the campaign, and what's fascinating looking back is how some of his themes on dealing with the media emerged, how fleeting other controversies seem now that we know he's the next president. There was a time when even Trump didn't think he was the favorite. You've been quoted as saying you have a 10 to maybe 20% chance of success. Not great odds. If this is a business deal, you probably wouldn't do it.
No, it's not great odds. I mean, I don't know what my chances are. Somebody asked me that. I said, I don't know, 10, 20%. I'm not saying it's a lock. But I have something that works.
There was a time when the media mocked him for talking about size while denigrating Marco Rubio. In the Detroit debate, when you talked about the size of your hands and the size of something
I didn't
else.
talk about it. Marco talked about it.
Well, I was going to say, he started it, you were responding, it was a joke. I didn't have any great problem with it. But it led to a tsunami of coverage, including this front page headline in the New York Times, The Descent into Donald Trump's Pants. How does that help you?
Look, he made a statement that I had small hands. He made it up. He's a politician. Politicians lie. I don't have small hands. I have good hands. Look, my hands are good.
The record show.
Okay?
Right.
I have good hands.
I always tried to ask Trump about specific news outlets and journalists. Ben Smith, the editor of the very popular site BuzzFeed, he told his reporters in a memo, it's okay to call Trump a mendacious racist because that's not an opinion, that's fact. The Daily Beast executive editor Noah Shachtman says, people should boycott your businesses because he thinks you're a racist and a neo-fascist. What do you make of this combined artillery?
I'm the only one that speaks my mind and tells the truth, and everybody knows I'm right. And I have great friends that are Muslims, and they call me, some of them, not some of them are not so thrilled, but at the highest level, and they called me and they said, what you did is right. There's a problem. We have to get to the bottom of it. There's a level of hatred and viciousness that we have to find out what we're going to do about it.
Let's talk about some of the journalists who've been attacking you, who are not in the opinion business after your proposal to temporarily bar most Muslims from coming to the United States. Tom Brokaw, a dangerous proposal that overrides history, the law, and the foundation of America itself.
You want me to comment on Tom Brokaw? I'm not a fan of Tom Brokaw. Never was a fan. When I did The Apprentice, he came over to me when I was sitting with George Steinbrenner. He said, "Thank you, Mr. Trump," because I had the big show on NBC, and it, was good for him with his newscast. Okay, I help him. And now all of a sudden, the first chance he gets, he attacks me. But he came over, "Thank you so much, Mr. Trump. Thank you so much for doing such a great job," because it was so successful.
And we talked about the tech titan who owns the Washington Post. But in reaction to that, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, who also owns the Washington Post, tweeted that he'll offer you a one-way ticket on one of his company's rockets.
Well, I wouldn't go on his rockets. I don't like that world. I've seen too many of those rockets exploding before they get off the ground. Right. I wouldn't like that. But I tell you what, you talk about Jeff Bezos. He bought the Washington Post, and he bought it as a thing to buy influence so that he doesn't have to pay tax at Amazon. That's in my opinion. He has influence because he's got power now.
He bought the paper privately. It's not
sure, he bought it privately, but he uses it.
It doesn't affect his Amazon.
Excuse me. Of course it does, Howard. Of course it does. He bought it privately so that he can influence people not to tax Amazon. Come on, I thought you were smart. Okay? And the only reason I say it is because the Washington Post, it treats me terribly. I mean, if I did 12 good things in one day, I would have 12 bad stories. It's terrible.
Well,
but the press is very dishonest.
You've gone from calling journalists scum to sleazebags, but you also said this
Those aren't strong enough.
Trump constantly slams CNN now, but there was a time when he was not too happy with Fox. You said that CNN treats you better than Fox. Now, in terms of the commentators, Charles Krauthammer, George Will, Karl Rove, Steve Hayes, Rich Lowry.
They're terrible.
They have ripped you.
Although Rich Lowry is coming along very nicely. Right. Even today he has a nice article because he's getting it. He gets it.
And you have hit them back in speeches and in interviews and on Twitter. But would you say that Fox is unfair to you in its news coverage?
It doesn't matter. Because look, when they do a story on me, and then a guy like Krauthammer gets up and he's so angry, you could see he's crazed. George Will is crazed. They mention the name Trump and he starts to shake.
They don't think you're a real conservative.
Look, let me tell you. You know what I am? I'm a winner. I know how to win. I've been winning all my life. These guys aren't winners.
And people sometimes forget that conservative journalists were among his biggest detractors.
More importantly, about the guys. I'm not treated well when they do a story and then I get Krauthammer commenting, or I get George Will, or Stephen Hayes. I mean, this poor guy. They mention Trump and he goes. It's like he becomes like a shaking monster. I never saw anything like it. The level of hatred is incredible. And you know the amazing thing? I'm pretty much on their side on most of the issues.
Bill O'Reilly said to you that you were being petty and thin-skinned and going after these journalists. I say you have every right to hit back when you're criticized, but you almost seem obsessive about it. So my question is it that you can't restrain yourself, or is it a strategy because a lot of your supporters despise the media?
It's neither. I don't mind a bad story when I do something wrong. Hey, when I do something wrong, a bad story doesn't even bother me. I'd rather not have it, but it doesn't bother me.
You said you're controversial.
But let me just
say, people think you're divisive.
I don't like a bad story or a false story or a false critique when I do something good. And they don't give me the credit that I deserve, okay? Which is, not only don't they give me, I'll take something good, do something amazing, and they'll make it negative. So they're very biased. It wouldn't matter if I were Abe Lincoln doing the debate. Krauthammer will say negative. It wouldn't matter if I was William Jennings Bryant, because they say he was great. Unfortunately, we don't have too many tapes, right? But it wouldn't matter who I was. They have their critique written up about me long before the debate even takes place.
But does it help?
Look, they're dishonest people. So
dishonest because they disagree with you.
Yeah, and it's good when I fire them. First of all, it makes me feel good. Second of all, it takes away credibility. You have to fight for yourself. That's the problem with our country. We don't fight for ourselves. We don't fight. We're not respected anymore as a country. You have to fight for yourself. When you're right. Look, again, if they critiqued me and I thought they were right, I wouldn't be upset by it. But when you do something great and they try and belittle you, gotta fight.
Donald Trump knows how to fight. More of my sit-downs with the president-elect in just a moment. More now of our look back at my interviews with candidate Trump and his less than flattering views of the press. At times, Trump would seem to strike a bit of a truce with the media. After months of attacking the press as dishonest and slimy, you seem mostly to be toning it down a bit. Have you gone from nuclear to low-level warfare?
Well, you know, I started off basically like with 0, and now I'm at 42. Some polls have me up at 42. In Florida, I'm 48. And I think I'm probably a little bit different. I mean, you have to be able to change a little bit, but I think I'm a little bit different. I'm doing very well.
Are journalists treating you with some new respect because they think you may win?
Not all, but they're treating me with great respect. A lot of them, I tell you, the Wall Street Journal has been terrific. They've really changed their views, and I've gained a great respect for some of the people in the Wall Street Journal. Some of the others have really changed their views, and rightfully so. I'm not saying it from my standpoint, Howie. I'm saying, you know, look, we've done a good job. Time Magazine wrote one of the most beautiful cover stories that I've ever had. The one from last week where I'm talking to a crowd, but they're talking about this whole campaign. So yeah, I think there's been a big change in mode and mood.
But the ceasefire periods would never last. You say again and again that most political journalists, not all, most political journalists are dishonest in the way they cover you. Why? Why do you think that is?
Well, there's great dishonesty in the media, and I didn't see it to the same extent with the financial media. You know, I've only been a politician now for 3 months, but they don't want to cover me accurately. I see such dishonesty. They have a couple of sites like Politico. It's totally dishonest. I mean, it's unbelievably
In
dishonest.
fact, you tweeted about Politico the other day. I wonder why somebody doesn't do something about the clowns at Politico and their totally dishonest reporting. Another tweet, you call Politico pure scum. Why
They
such
are
harsh
a
language?
very dishonest site, and
mean,
I would say they're
why?
probably because they write things that are not true. They never even call us. I mean, they very rarely even call.
You are constantly denouncing some journalists who write about you and talk about you. Let me run through it. ABC's Martha Raddatz, unprofessional and biased, you say. NBC's Chuck Todd, a real loser. National News' Jonah Goldberg, dumb as a rock. Columnist George Will, a total dope. Fox's Charles Krauthammer, a totally overrated clown. I don't think you really believe that. I think that they criticize you, and your instinct, you're like a boxer, is to punch back.
Well, I do punch back. I believe in punching back, but you know, those are people that I didn't think have treated me fairly. A while ago they said, he's never going to run, he's never going to run. Then I ran, then he said, oh, he'll never file his papers, and I filed my papers. Now they don't know what to say, and then all of a sudden I get these really big poll numbers, and they're really good.
Fascinating to look back. Still to come, the Newsweek reporter who made reckless charges against Donald Trump and blamed hostility on Twitter for a health setback. Newsweek's Kurt Eichenwald, who's been digging into Donald Trump's business dealings, had a rough time when Fox's Tucker Carlson confronted him about his Twitter messages, including one with absolutely no evidence that he believes Trump was once institutionalized.
I read your Twitter feed, and this is the kind of stuff I'm reading on it. At one point, you ask of conservatives, why do they hate America? You describe Trump as, quote, stupid and lazy. You refer to dumb Trumpers. You say this to Kellyanne Fitzpatrick. F you. You say this to Trump voters. Go F yourself.
I mean, one of the things I want to make sure of, you have a real habit of taking a lot of things out of context.
Yeah, I want you to answer this question. Was he in a mental hospital in 1990, as you allege, or was he not?
Let me answer the question.
Go ahead.
Look, you're not fooling anybody. You're trying to stop me from giving the answer. So let me give you the answer.
This is a little nutty. I got to be honest. I'm asking you a very
I also
crisp
noticed
question.
earlier.
That's stunningly irresponsible, but here's where it gets strange. After taking flack on Twitter, Eichenwald, who has epilepsy, says he suffered a seizure after someone tweeted at him a flashing strobe light and a wish for a seizure. Now Eichenwald is threatening legal action against this online critic.
Now copycats? Oh, apparently, I can't look at my Twitter feed anymore, but apparently a lot of people find this very funny. A lot of people who identify themselves as Trump supporters are loading up my Twitter feed with more strobes. It is amazing to me that, you know, simply because I'm a political reporter, simply because I write about, you know, Donald Trump, that we have become so sick and twisted in this country that people think they have, you know, the right and obligation to inflict, you know, potentially very serious injury.
This doesn't sound like a criminal case to me, but we certainly wish him good health, and I can't fathom anyone deliberately trying to induce a seizure. But Eichenwald, who tried to dismiss his claim that Trump was once in a mental hospital as a joke, has been throwing F-bombs and all kinds of insults at people on Twitter, so he's hardly an innocent victim here. Your top tweets are back. What are the best and worst aspects of the coverage, and how did it affect your trust in the media? Ed Shermer, worst. Mainstream media openly an extension of the Hillary campaign in reporting and debate mod. Best. Hosts facing 11-8. Trust, total loss. Shayna Lynn, best. Really exposed how media actively colludes with Democrat powers. Worst. Sanders got a short straw as a result. Flossie, worst was when the media distorted primary by giving DJT over $2 billion in free publicity, then complained that he won. They should retire. Everybody. Cheryl Johansson, worst, how charges against HRC were handled, media ignored, excused, Trump, no benefit of doubt, ashamed of my journalism degree. And Cody, best, never a dull moment. Worst, use of the term elites. Impact, realized 80% plus of journalists are lazy and not too bright. Ouch. Stephanie Trail, worst, anchors always gave personal opinion and closed segment with ugliness. Orange skin, fake hair, etc. Facts were the best. At least the hair's real. That's it for this edition of Media Buzz. I'm Howard Kurtz. Merry Christmas, folks. Happy Hanukkah. I just wrapped a special prime time with Megyn Kelly on the media in the 2016 campaign. Fascinating hour. Hope you'll check it out. First airing Monday night at 9 and midnight Eastern, 9 Pacific as well. And take a look at our Facebook page. Give us a like. Let us know what you think. MediaBuzz at foxnews.com. We respond. We post a lot of original content there. It's called Your Buzz. Continue the conversation on Twitter at Howard Kurtz. Have a great holiday. We're back here on New Year's Day. See you then with the latest buzz.